All right, good. All right, Boker Tov, everyone. All right, let's. This is our fourth session together. Before we start our learning, why don't we begin with a bracha? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'shivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, I think this is what I want to do here.
Can we print from here?
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Can we print these out?
Let's see, you want to...
Can you send us the slides later?
I will, I'm going to post the slides on the synagogue website where I have all of the recorded classes.
Awesome.
So I'll try and do that later today.
You can take screenshots too if there's something that you want now.
Yeah, that's what I've been doing too.
Okay, so let's get started. All right. Okay, so this morning we are going to talk about the famous or perhaps infamous blessings of in our Siddur of not making a Gentile, a woman, or a slave. Excuse me just one moment. My son is a little loud in his class right now. All right, sorry about that. Okay, so if you have a Siddur, I would invite you to the Birchot Hashach. Open it up to the Birchot HaShachar, the morning blessings. And if you have let's say a traditional Siddur, an Orthodox Siddur, it's going to be different than if you have a non-Orthodox Siddur, most likely. So, does anybody have Siddur Sim Shalom?
Yes.
This is all right. So if you've got the Shabbat, it'll be on page 65. Weekday, it'll be on page 6. And so the blessings that we are going to be looking at, just got to open that right page. The blessings are going to be the second, third, and fourth blessing on the page. So in Hebrew, it says, so Baruch, and to the end, then She'asani B'Tzalmo, She'asani Yisrael, She'asani Ben or Bat Chorim. So She'asani is that made me. So She is that, Asa made, Ni is the suffix for I. So that made me B'Tzalmo. So this is language out of Genesis, in his image, or in God's image. She'asani Yisrael, who has made me an Israelite, or really made me a Jew. And then finally, She'asani Ben Chorin or Bat Chorin, literally the son of a free person or the daughter of a free person. In other words, made me free. Now, these are not the traditional blessings. All right, does anybody have an Orthodox Siddur on them that they're looking at?
I have the art scroll.
You have art scroll, okay. Have you found where in art scroll?
Page 18.
18, okay. And what does it have for those second, third, and fourth blessings?
It says, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam shelo asani goy, and Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam shelo asani aved, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam shelo asani isha, for a man, and women say Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam she'asani kirtzono.
Okay, so what would we call these blessings?
Negative?
They're all right. So they're framed negative. Well, yeah, except for the women's version. Yeah, would you refer to these as the traditional blessings?
They're the ones in traditional Siddurim.
They're the ones in traditional Siddurim. Okay, well said. All right. So let's, as you look at these, first of all, let's try and kind of separate our own emotional reactions to seeing these blessings formulated in this way. Why do you think these are recited? Keep in mind that these are developed in the second. Well, all right. Let's just say that these appear and are framed as the traditional blessings. Why might they appear this way? And pay attention as well to the order in which they appear. Any thoughts?
These all have to do with status.
Okay, certainly. They all have to do with status, and in the ancient world, status was incredibly important. So goy is really just is the word for nation, but by the time of the rabbis, it referred specifically to non-Jewish nations. Eved could be a slave, slave or servant. It's got the same word, but presumably it means slave. And then Isha is woman. So who is saying these blessings?
Men.
Most
Men, right? So we would say,
Foreigners. or
men
something.
have the obligation.
oh, don't say obligation yet, right? Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But we have, so if you're thanking God for not being these things, then presumably this is a person who is Jewish, is free, and is male. That's the presumption we can make. And then we have this women say, Shasani Kirtso no, and we'll see where that one comes from as well. Now, how about the order that they appear here?
What about if you're a woman who's a slave and a foreigner?
Well, then you would have none of these blessings to say.
It's going from general to more specific.
General to more specific. Okay, so goy would be the biggest category. Then slave, although, male, female, that's 50%.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so it's the percentage of,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right.
So you're least likely to be a foreigner, more likely to be a slave, and way more likely to be a woman.
Yeah, all right, so let's just kind of hang on to these questions. And so these are, as you saw in your Siddurim, these are included as part of the Birchot HaShachar, the morning blessings. The other blessings that we saw, though, all had something to do with the morning wake-up routine, right? We recite them as we're getting up, as we're going along with our morning getting ready, and they are matched along with particular actions that we take. Now, these three blessings are not, and yet they are, in an Ashkenazi Siddur anyways, they are put right after the blessing of the rooster blessing, right? When we first hear our alarm clock. So the question is, what are they doing there? Because they do not fit in with the other blessings. These were not included, or nothing like these were included in that passage in the Talmud that we saw earlier. So let's see where it's going to take us. Okay, so the earliest appearance of this, and I apologize for the density of the page, but this is from the Tosefta. And we've mentioned the Tosefta before. The Tosefta is from the 2nd century. It's Tannaitic. It is parallel to the Mishnah. So same time period, a lot of the same characters, preserves a lot of the same traditions. It follows the same organization of the Mishnah. But it's less heavily edited, and it is not what is used as the basis for the Talmud. Right, the Talmud is based on the Mishnah directly, and the Tosefta is kind of, let's say, supplemental to that. The Talmud will often quote something from the Tosefta, and when it does, we would call that quotation a Breita. We talked about a Breita last week. So here we have a Tosefta from Tractate Brachot, And it begins as follows. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Shalosh brachot tzarich levarech b'chol yom. Rabbi Judah says, 3 blessings is a person obligated to bless every day. So here they are. Baruch shelo asani goy. That's the first one. Blessed are you, etc., who did not make me a goy, a non-Jew, a Gentile, let's say. Next, Baruch shelo asani isha. Blessed, etc., that you did not make me a woman, or for not making me a woman. Third, Baruch shelo asani bor. Blessed are you that did not make me a bore. So a bore is the same in Hebrew as it is in English. All right, kind of a fool, a crude, uneducated person. All right, so that's how the Tosefta begins, and now it's going to explain why for each of these 3 things. By the way, don't take the Tosefta's word for it. The Tosefta is saying what it's saying, but we're going to see some different versions of this. So goy. So why does it have the bracha about the goy? And here we're going to quote Isaiah. All nations, kol hagoyim ka'ain negdo, are like nothing to him. All right. He considers them to be empty and void. All right. So if that's the quote from Isaiah, then according to the Tosefta, according to Rabbi Yehuda, we are giving thanks to God for not being a part of one of those nations who, as Isaiah says, are like nothing before God. So, which means that, I guess, conversely, we are something to God. All right. So next, it says Isha, so woman, ein Isha chayevet b'mitzvot. A woman, because women are not obligated in commandments. All right. So similarly, if we're thanking, or if somebody is thanking God for this particular reason, it means that we're giving thanks because we are obligated in the commandments. And then finally, we have bor she'ein yirei chet v'lo am haaretz chasid. A bor, because a bor is not afraid of sin, and a kind of an am haaretz, kind of a country bumpkin, is not pious, right? So in other words, we're part of the let's say the intellectual or the spiritual elite, and we're giving thanks for that. And then we have a mashal. Mashal is a parable. So what is this like? To a king of flesh and blood who tells his servant to cook him some food, but the servant has never cooked food in his life. And so what does he do? He's going to make a terrible meal. He's going to ruin the food and anger the master. Or the king tells the servant to hem for him a robe, but the servant has never hemmed a robe in his life. And in the end, he causes the robe to get dirty and he angers his master, right? So these are both kind of examples that the Midrash is giving about why a bore. We're thankful to not be a bore, because here we are, we're about to recite all of these prayers and blessings, and if we weren't knowledgeable, if we weren't educated, then we would screw them all up. And what we would do would end up insulting and angering God, right? So we're giving thanks that we have the ability to do it properly. Joy, are you raising your hand?
How is that related to not being afraid of sin?
Well, so the idea of I'm fearful of sin means I have a sense of humility and an awareness of God's presence, awareness of heaven, and so this is an expression that's used quite commonly. So a person who's not afraid of sin is a person who's either wicked or is ignorant. Joy, were you raising a hand? You'll have to come off of mute.
Sorry, I've been Zooming for hours.
No problem. I understand.
I was going to ask sort of the same question. Who's the bore in the parable? And to me, it's the angry master, because that seems so boorish. But I understand. I was wondering if master was like God.
No, the king is always God in these parables.
Okay, too bad.
Yeah.
That doesn't make for a very, very compassionate God, but
maybe not from a a 21st century perspective.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Sure, sure.
Rabbi,
Okay.
can I ask a quick question,
Sure, go
please?
ahead.
I was late getting back from a doctor's appointment, so I missed the first part. In my Siddur, it doesn't have about the woman.
Which Siddur do you have?
I have the Sim Shalom.
Yeah, so the Sim Shalom has changed all of these.
That's what I figured.
Right. But by the way, the so-called traditional Siddur also changed these. Shelo Asani Bur does not appear in the traditional Siddur.
How about the woman?
Woman does.
The woman doesn't appear here, or
The Shelo Asani Goy and Shelo Asani Isha both appear in the traditional Siddur. Neither of those, none of these appear in the conservative Siddur or in any modern liberal Siddur.
Okay.
Okay. So but this.
So,
Thank you.
Rabbi?
Yes.
So even the woman's version of the blessing isn't in the conservative Siddur for both men and women to say?
Nope.
Okay, that's why I can't find it.
Yeah, you will not find it there. It's also not here.
Sorry.
All right.
So how did a boor become a slave?
Well, we'll find out. Okay. It also appears in the Talmud. Now, this is a continuation of a passage that we saw earlier. All right, so I'm not going to read this, but this is where the Rabbi Meir statement about needing to say 100 blessings every day. This is in the Babylonian Talmud, so this is the version where he states it as an obligatory thing. Right? So that passage then continues with the following. Tanya. So Tanya is a word that says, okay, what we're about to see is a Braita. All right, so Tanaitic material from the 2nd century from the land of Israel. It's taught in a Braita, Rabbi Meir. So we have the same person speaking here. Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Meir Omer, Chayav Adam levarech shlosh brachot. He said a person is obligated to bless 3 blessings, b'chol yom, every day. Eluhen, these are they. She'asani Yisrael, shelo asani isha, shelo asani bor. All right, so the first one, who has made me an Israelite, who has not made me a woman, and who has not made me a bore.
Those are the 3.
What do you notice here?
They in order is different. There are only 3.
There's 3. Yeah. What do you notice? What else do you notice about them?
They're the inverse, the negative, did not make me.
Yeah. So for the first one, in the Tosefta we saw who did not make me a goy. Here it's She'asani Yisrael, who made me an Israelite. All right. That's interesting.
Oh, I see.
The first one, yeah.
Right? So now we have 1 positively formulated blessing and 2 negatively formulated blessings. But let's see the continuation. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I think
So at least one of the conservative formulations is very old.
Maybe.
and this puts an obligation and it makes it on a man.
Yes, Rabbi Meir says it's obligated now. Yeah.
And it's a man, not a person.
Well, but Adam could be person. I mean, it doesn't say ish. If it said chayav ish, then I would say yes. But Adam can be more general.
Thank you.
So, all right, let's see the continuation of this. Now we get a little story. This is not part of the Braita, so this is a story that's from the Gemara. So later in Babylonia, Rab Acha Bar Yaakov Shamei Lebare. So Rabbi Acha, the son of Yaakov, heard his son, Dehavaka Mavarech, and his son was saying his morning blessings. He says, and what did he say? Shelo asani bor. He said, "Praise are you, God, who for not making me a bor." That's the third of the 3 blessings. Amarle, he said to him, Kule hai nami. He says, is it correct? Is it proper to go that far? Amarle ve'ela mai mevarech. Shelo asani eved. Hainu isha Eved Zil Tafe. So he says, well, what should I say? Should I really, you want me to say who did not make me a slave, right? That would be the same as a woman. So what is he getting at here? What's the reason?
The status thing.
Okay, maybe. So what is he equated?
A woman is an idiot and a slave.
Wouldn't take it that hard.
I would say a woman is the same as a slave.
In what sense?
His old work.
Status.
Has no rights. Status.
Status, serving.
Okay, so perhaps it has to do with status.
I think it has to do with the obligations that women have, especially then. They did pretty much everything. The men, studied. Maybe he sees that maybe his mother works terribly hard. And
okay. So
children,
it's harder to be a woman than it is to be a man.
That's right. That's how I see it.
Okay.
It seems like here, a woman now is at the same status as a slave, not beneath a slave.
Yeah.
This is 3rd century, right?
This somewhere in the 3rd, 5th century. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it may have something. Remember the explanation for woman that appeared in the Tosefta?
She didn't have the obligations to do that.
She wasn't obligated in mitzvot, right? So this is essentially saying, thank you, God, for giving me the opportunity to fulfill so many mitzvot, right?
Why
so
didn't they make that positive?
Sorry, why didn't they? Well, I don't know why they didn't, but
they could have said it in the positive, the same way they flipped the not a goy to make me an Israelite.
They could have. Well, let's hang on to some of these questions.
So I'm curious if if the father is questioning his son's view of a woman, that's equal to a slave, which is so far from whether a woman observes mitzvot or not, or performs mitzvot.
Yeah, so you're saying that the father thinks more, probably thinks more highly of women than the son.
Correct.
Okay, that's possible. All right, so we've got two possibilities essentially here. One might have something to do with mitzvot, kind of number of mitzvot I'm obligated to her, and we're saying that women have more obligations than slaves do, or that it has something to do with status. All right. But one of the other things that I think is significant here is that we are seeing flexibility in brachot, right? We saw that clearly Rav Achaz Bar Yaakov's son learned either from Rabbi Meir or from the Tosefta or something. He learned what the traditional bracha was, and his father heard him and he didn't like it, and he felt that he had the authority to change the bracha. Right? And the discussion they have is not over whether or not you have the right or the authority to change the language of the bracha. It's whether or not this particular bracha is saying something distinct from the other bracha. Right? That's the nature of their argument. So we're seeing fluidity in the formulation here. Okay. All right. Speaking of fluidity, there are lots and lots of variations of these brachot that we find. The Geniza, which we've mentioned before, is a great source of some of these blessings. While we don't necessarily have long, full Siddurim, we do have fragments of, pieces of paper that have brachot listed on them. And so this is, and most of those, by the way, are from the land of Israel, right? So we're seeing, especially in the land of Israel, a lot of variation in the blessings and the prayers that people are reciting. So this is a fragment that is typical of many that appears in the Geniza. It was found in Cairo from Eretz Yisrael, and it gives a version of these. So it says, "Praised are you, etc., who made me, she'asani," positive formulation, "a person and not a beast, a man and not a woman, an Israelite and not a goy, one who circumcises others and is not uncircumcised himself, free and not a slave. So it's got 5 blessings. Now, scholars think the last 2, the circumcision and the free one, are later additions. That, sometime post Gemara that appeared. But look what we have here. We have these blessings now formulated in both positive and negative, each blessing. Person, not a beast. Man, not a woman. Israelite, not a Gentile. Where does it come from? All right, let's find out. We're not quoting Torah, certainly.
And Gemara.
Right? We're not. These did not appear in the Talmud. They don't appear in the Tosefta in this particular formulation. Someone decided this would be proper to recite the blessings in this way. So who was that someone? Answer: Socrates.
Socrates.
All right. So this is from the 4th century before the Common Era. It's attributed to Socrates. Now look at the formulation here. I was grateful to fortune, right? So we're not praising God, the creator of the universe, but now we're expressing gratitude to fortune, that I was born a person and not a beast. I was born a man and not a woman, a Greek and not a barbarian.
Oh my goodness.
Now, isn't that interesting?
Yes, it is.
Right? So this version in the from the Geniza lines up exactly parallel. Right? The exact formulation. So now we think back to what appeared in the Babylonian Talmud, and before that, what appears in the Tosefta, and we ask, where does this come from? Right?
Would this be that the person who came up with this would have been influenced by the 3rd century BC when the Greeks were in Israel?
Absolutely.
That kind of thought.
Absolutely. I don't think there's any question about that. That this idea of, for a Greek, for someone who's a cultured Greek citizen, to express something like this, thank you to the gods or the fortune, whatever, that I'm this and not that, right? That was apparently a very common kind of thing for Greeks to talk about. And so for the rabbis, or for maybe even before the rabbis, Second Temple Jews who don't see themselves as Greek and maybe want to differentiate themselves from Greek, it would be perfectly reasonable for them to take this, let's say, common expression that Greeks say, and then to twist it and to make it Jewish, right? The person, not a beast, man and not a woman, those apparently are universal, but that last one, right? I mean, Israelite and not a Gentile, right? And that word goy may have even had a double meaning, not just meaning non-Jew, but even making thank God I'm an Israelite and not a Greek. Even so, coded.
What about, would the Greeks wake up every morning and say this, or just periodically?
I think so. I mean, I don't know exactly what circumstances a person would say this, but there are other variations of this that appear in other Greek literature. So this, and we know that in Greek society, in Greco-Roman society, there was this sense of superiority of based on culture and all of these things. And the barbarians were particularly bad.
Now I noticed that the Jewish version has free and not a slave, and I don't see that in the Greek version.
Correct. Well, but that's a later addition. And that language, I'll say that the circumcision, the free and not a slave, does appear in other rabbinic texts. It's not brought in as part of this trio of blessings. Typically, here it does appear. So someone felt like they wanted to include it. And I would put money, not that we could prove it, that the person who wrote down this Geniza fragment had never read Diogenes and had never heard of him. Right? So, but he has inherited a tradition of these blessings appearing in this particular positive and negative formulation in this particular order. All right, but we're not done. New Testament. Look what Paul says in the New Testament. There is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither slave nor free. There is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus.
Where's that?
Yeah.
The New Testament.
Would you say it again?
So, so Paul writes, there is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither slave nor free. There is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. So this is part of this kind of universal message to the to all the peoples of the world from Paul, that basically erasing all sorts of class distinctions.
When was that written?
More
It was
liberal.
New Testament, so I would get 2nd century.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is part of the polemic against Judaism.
Yeah, well, you can see where where the formulation, where it comes from, or at least you can see that it's utilizing a formulation that was known.
Now, I can't see the dates where was the New Testament version later than the Jewish version from the Geniza?
Well, the New Testament was that 2nd century from Paul,
Yeah.
right? So, and the Geniza probably like 8th or 9th century.
Oh, so the Geniza one is newer.
Yeah, but I mean, the Geniza isn't that's just one example. There's lots of text. So there's versions of these blessings that are floating around, and there's variations from one to the other. And I guess what I want to point out with this Diogenes text is that when the Tosefta, which started this whole thing, at least in a Jewish context, well, in terms of our own written record, it has already inherited this way of thinking about self versus other, and giving gratitude for the situation I, free male, am in, versus people who do not enjoy the same kind of status. So that way of expressing oneself is something that then gets utilized by the rabbis, even though they're not the ones who made it up, right? They kind of imported that style of speaking, of praising from the Greeks. And it seems that Paul has done the same thing.
So was Paul copying the formula from Diogenes, or was he taking it from the Jewish source? Because if the Geniza version is newer,
I can't answer that, right? So is the New Testament, is it a polemic against the rabbis, or is it a polemic against Greco-Roman attitudes? Correct. I would guess it would be against Greco-Roman attitudes, but I cannot say one way or the other. Okay, so now we're back to what appears in a so-called traditional Siddur.
Excuse me?
Yes.
I just wanted to recommend again the book called Aphrodite and the Rabbis, and it goes over so much of our modern Ashkenazic whatever practices are from the Greek. It's very interesting.
Yes, that's by one of my teachers at JTS, Bert Vysotsky. Mm-hmm. Aphrodite and the Rabbis. It's a good read. All right, so let me just jump here. We can see it side by side. So something that's interesting is let me back up once more. The order here, person, beast, this order from the Geniza is parallel to the Diogenes. Look at the traditional Siddur. The order in the traditional Siddur is Goy, Eved, Isha, which also lines up with the order that appears in the New Testament. So that's kind of interesting as well. And which is influencing which, I can't say. Well, actually, I probably can't say. I would. The order that it appears in the traditional Siddur is later, because we haven't even seen these exact formulations yet. All right, now how about what women say?
I was wondering.
All right, so what is it? She'asani kirtzono. All right, so she'asani kirtzono means according to his will. This expression first appears in a book written by Jacob ben Asher, which is called the Tur. So you've probably heard of the Shulchan Aruch, the set table. That's the Jewish law code of the 16th century. So that is written based on the Tur, which was an earlier work, I think in the 14th century, by Jacob ben Asher. It was also a law code. It was a little bit more wordy, and it included more back and forth arguments and explanations. And but it brought in Jewish law kind of in a comprehensive way. And so when Yosef Karo in the Shulchan Aruch was writing he was basing it heavily on the Tur. So here, the Tur is the first time that we see a reference to this blessing that women recite, She'asani kirtzono. So let's see what he has to say about it. All right, so he's giving us the blessing. So, Shelo asani isha, for you did not make me a woman. She'ena chayevet b'mitzvot aseh shehazman grama, because they are not obligated in mitzvot aseh, so to do mitzvot, thou shalt, positive mitzvot, shehazman grama, that are time dependent. So a positive mitzvah, positive commandment that has to be done at a particular time. Generally, women are considered to be exempt from those commandments, and so this is essentially the reason that we saw all the way back in the Tosefta. So that's the reason that Jacob ben Asher gives for why men would recite this blessing. It has to do with the blessing of lots of opportunities to fulfill mitzvot, more opportunities to fulfill mitzvot. But then he goes on, v'nahagu hanashim. The women are accustomed levarech she'asani kirtzano, to say the blessing, who has made me according to his will. All right, so now by his time, women are doing this. Now, why they're doing this, who composed this blessing? Was it something that men wrote and gave to them? Was it something that women developed on their own? We don't know. But he offers a theory about why. Tell me what you think. And it's possible that they literally behave in such way because it's like a person who justifies for himself the judgment of evil or the bad decree, right? So it's a resignation to my fate. What do we think?
It's much softer than the previous definition.
Nice. He's saying that women are accepting their lowly status.
No, but what I'm saying, it was pretty harsh on the previous ones that we read.
Yeah, it is pretty harsh.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When it says they're not obligated in a positive time-bound commandments, is it possible, looking at it in a different way, that women had obligations that they couldn't be set to a certain time schedule?
Oh yeah, I think that's certainly the case, and that's one of the ways in which it's traditionally understood. This idea that the kind of the positive time-bound commandment exception, and by the way, slaves are also exempt from positive time-bound commandments, which is why earlier in the discussion between Rabbi Acha and his son, their debate is whether women and slaves are the same status, because they both seem to have obligations to the same mitzvot.
That means they had children.
Sorry?
That means they have children.
Yeah, they're taking.
So that's why they're.
Yeah, they're taking care of children, running the household, et cetera, et cetera. And now it seems that this explanation, this is a general category of exemption, came after women were already excluded from lots of mitzvot, right? So this is because there are a few exceptions to this general category.
Rabbi,
Yes.
of course, it's horrifying to read this. I mean,
Yes.
everything.
I would.
But I've heard the Shema being referred to as accepting the yoke of God, in that sense. So I'm wondering if that maybe you would expound on that, because perhaps that is a similar. Perhaps what's being expressed here is a similar kind of feeling that this is what your fate is, and our fate is to be. We accept that we are in God's yoke.
Mm-hmm.
Here we accept the same thing.
Mm-hmm. It's just that the language he uses, it's shematzdika alav hadin al hara'ah, right? It's not, in the language of the Shema we talk about, it's ol malchut shamayim, I'm accepting the yoke of the kingdom of heaven, right? So I'm accepting God's authority over my life, essentially, right? As opposed to this, which is like there's been a sentence, a court sentence that's been bad, like a bad decree, and now I'm justifying that for myself. That's the language that Yaakov ben Asher is using here.
Well, he's using that, but if it was women who developed this blessing for themselves to say, it's actually more universal, and men could say it too.
But they didn't.
I know they didn't, but everyone has to acknowledge that God made them according to God's will.
Yeah. Joy, you had your hand up. Yeah, unmute.
That last sentence, if I'm reading it correctly, just sounds so much like people who accepted slavery.
Uh-huh. Yeah, you're finding ways to justify this inegalitarian society. Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. Is there a version that the slave said?
Not, apparently no.
Unless if the slave was male, would he say, making me a man?
I do not know of any.
Did they have a voice?
Of any discussion of blessings that the slaves say. There is discussion, by the way. Does a convert say Shasani Yisrael, who made me a Jew? That discussion does appear, and there are different answers that are given around that question. All right, but not all men take this approach. All right, so this got some notoriety about 8 or 9 years ago. This guy Avraham ben Mordechai Farisal, an Italian Jew, scribe, wrote a handwritten Siddur. It's called a Machzor, and it was in Italy, 1471. And this is what it says. So these are the morning blessings. So you can see where it says the Baruch Atah, the Bet Aleph Yud in the box. That's the formula. Baruch Atah Adonai, and then Aleph Mem Hey Eloheinu Melech HaOlam. So that's how they're writing out the bracha formula. And then we have Pokeach Ivrim, opens the eyes. Zokef Kufim, straightens the bent over. Malbish Aramim, clothes the naked. Bakahar Tzalamayim, stretches out the earth over the waters, right? These are all of the Birchot HaShachar that we see. But then, look at these. Shasitani Isha Velo Ish, who has made me a woman and not a man. Shalo Asitani Ama V'Shivcha, who has not made me a slave or a maidservant. And these are both female slave, like the female words. And then the third, Shalo Asani Nochrit, who has not made me basically, I'll say a non-Jewess. Right? So he wrote another copy of the Siddur in 1480, where with the same brachot.
So right. Who is saying this and when? Meaning, is that a woman saying it to herself?
A rabbi gave this as a present to his wife.
Okay.
These are her morning blessings.
Okay.
Exactly parallel to what the men are saying. Although, making me a woman and not a man, that clearly she is not saying this with what Yaakov ben Asher has in mind. Right? She's thinking something very different. Now, I would suspect this was not particularly widespread. This doesn't make its way into any printed Siddurim. But again, this Avraham ben Mordechai Farsal in the 15th century is making up his own blessings.
Yeah. I would
Women
want to
have
be married to him.
Yeah, I mean, that's a forward-thinking guy. Yeah.
Renaissance, what do you expect? Sorry, Cindy.
women have the opportunity to carry life within them, and that's an amazing thing.
Yeah. He didn't write a commentary on the Siddur, and the Rebbitzin who received this from her husband didn't put notes about what she was thinking when she received it or when she said it. That would be nice to have.
Yeah.
All right, I want to back up. Let's see how much time we have left. Okay, I want to back up a bit to the just to put the New Testament up on the side. So this line, "Who did not make me a foreigner," Shelo asani goy. And already, if you recall, we saw the version in the Talmud, and I'll bring us back to that as well, where it formulated in the positive, "Who made me an Israelite." So what's going on? Why would that be framed in the positive? So there is an answer to that question. The answer is it wasn't. It was framed in the negative. So what happened? So in the 13th century, you started a new phenomenon in Christian Europe of Christians being very concerned with what is in Jewish books. And so you see in Paris in the 13th century, a big public book burning. 10,000 books are burned, lots of copies of the Talmud. Lists are made of either books or passages or words that are not allowed to be used. And Jews, initially it was Jewish scribes, and then later after the printing press, publishers are intentionally self-censoring when they're living under Christian authorities, because they want to basically stay under the radar. And so that's an issue. And so one of the things that Christians were worried about is negative comments about non-Jews, because there's always a suspicion that that maybe they're talking about Christians when they're saying such things. All right. So Shelo asani goy, who has not made me a goy. So who's a goy?
Anyone who's not a Jew.
Not a Jew.
Maybe, but the Christians thought when the Jews, when they're saying goy, they mean Christians specifically, right? And so this became a controversial thing to write, and so they changed it, and so there were several different kinds of formulations that they used to replace it. And so we see in Siddurim from kind of the late Middle Ages, instead of Shelo asani goy, things like She'asani Yisrael, who has made me an Israelite, a Jew. And that passage in the Talmud from Rabbi Meir is probably also is one of the things that got changed. We see some other variations. Sometimes they'll replace the word goy with particular nations that existed in ancient times that no longer exist. So Shelo asani kuti. So the Kutis were the Kuthites. Were Samaritans who weren't really an issue. There was no mistaking the Kutim with the Christians, or Arami, the Arameans. Arameans didn't exist either. And then you also saw Shelo asani Yishmaeli, Ishmaelites. right?
All
So,
right.
so here, and this was especially playing up to the Christians who didn't like the Muslims, and so by publishing Shelo Asani Yishmaeli, that was maybe a way to ingratiate themselves with the Christian authorities that they were living under. But anyway, in any event, it took off the pressure. Now, in some Siddurim, they erased the line entirely and left the space there. So you get to that, and there's nothing there. So does this mean that people know they know to say Shelo Asani Goy, and it's just not being printed, and everybody knows what they're supposed to do? When they're saying these other formulations of it, are they actually saying what's written on the page? Do they have something else in mind? We don't know exactly what people were thinking at the time, but probably people are aware of some of the history of some of these changes and why it's been changed. Probably the most well-known of the censored prayers, and I gave a talk on this a few years ago, is the Aleinu, where there's a line that was forced to be removed, where the Jews were criticizing basically the non-Jewish nations, specifically the pagan nations, for worshiping their idols. But Jews were accused of making fun of Jesus specifically in the prayer, and so then it was removed. We're finding that some of these things are making their way back into the Siddur in modern times. So that's kind of interesting. Now, how about the conservative Siddur? Or I'd be curious to know does Mishkan Tefillah have this?
It has the same as the conservative.
Okay, so let's see what that is. All right, so the first one we have is Sha'asani B'Tsalmo. All right, so made me in his image. I would suggest that the pronoun is not meant to be male in the way that it's presented, but and this comes from Genesis, of course, where God makes humanity in God's own image, male and female. God created them in the image of God, right? And so this is a very positive formulation. Thank you for making me a human being. By the way, this formulation dates back to 1946 and has pretty much been adopted by all liberal Siddurim. The next one, Sha'asani Yisrael, which we've seen actually is a traditional formulation, right? We saw this going all the way back to that Geniza fragment, right? Where there it was who made me an Israelite and not a Goy, but that Sha'asani Yisrael, that appears there. It appears in the censored version of Rabbi Meir's text from the Breita. And then the third one, Sha'asani ben Chlorin or bat Chlorin. So literally the son of a free person or the daughter of a free person. And to say that someone is ben or bat something means they're part of the group that has this association with this word, right? So maybe free. Now, what do you think of this triplet?
No, it's what we have now.
So what we have now.
It doesn't.
Does it tell a story?
There's no negative in there.
Completely positive.
It doesn't distinguish between man or woman.
Mm-hmm.
Other than grammatically.
Yeah, the Betachlorine and Botchlorine. But yeah, that's just a grammar. Yeah, that's not a substantive issue.
Is it an order of, like, in his image is Adam, a Jew, Yisrael is Jacob's era, and free person is Moses' era, so it's in order of the story?
I never thought about that. There is a certain historical order here.
These still aren't things that you do in the morning.
So was that, Mike?
These are still not things that you do in the morning.
Oh no, they have nothing to do. So the conservative Siddur is 1946 is coming along and really completely changing the traditional, the so-called traditional Siddur. It could have taken them out of place. It could have put them somewhere else, right? And because originally they didn't go there. They didn't go in the middle of Birchot HaShachar, right? They appear elsewhere. And in fact, in Sephardi Siddurim, they come after all of the Birchot HaShachar. But they decided that they wanted to preserve the traditional order, the traditional structure, just to maintain that continuity.
Mishkan does not preserve the order. It moves those three toward the end.
Sorry, in Mishkan, it moves it to the end?
Not completely to the end, but almost.
Which page are these on?
These are on page 6 in the weekday, 65 in the Shabbat.
Can you hear some of the discussion that happened about it? Because I can see if I were writing the prayer book and I wasn't mandated to put these things in, I wouldn't have put in free person, because that's been a long time that we haven't had to consider that of being slaves. I would have been thinking about being made a Jew in the sense of our modern sensibilities and what to do about that. So at least I would have thought about those things, especially if they weren't mandated. So if the only reason is historical ties, but were there other things that were considered?
So going back to the late 18th century, you're already starting to find rabbis, even before Reform came along, you're finding rabbis that are starting to make some changes, right? When you think about the Enlightenment, and as Jews are starting to kind of come into citizenship of certain countries in Europe, the idea that we no longer are a separate nation in the same way prompted some, Siddurim starting late 18th century to start to make some changes in this approach. This particular formulation came in 1946, but this had already been happening for 150 years at that point. So I want to read to you something that Danny Gordis wrote. He wrote it about 30 years after they made the change, but Danny Gordis was on the committee that made the change.
Okay, perfect.
And he's writing it specifically with regards to the who made me a free person. Okay, here's what he writes. That by saying this, it expresses the basic conviction that freedom is not a gift conferred to human beings by governmental fiat. He goes on a little further. Freedom is the inalienable right of every human being deriving from his estate as a creature fashioned in the image of God.
So like the Declaration of Independence.
Yes, he uses, and he even quotes, he's quoting some of the American foundational documents. So seeing this not, whereas originally this prayer had to do with status. I'm thankful for the particular status in which I was created, and I wasn't part of this other status. Here we have really taken this up a notch, right? We are universalizing these concepts. Really all three of them are universalizing the concept. It's not about the particular situation I happen to find myself. This is in a much more existential way. All human beings are in God's image, and I'm thankful for that, right? Every human being is inalienably free, right? And that's not something that a government can grant or take away. Right? God intends for us to be free. That's a big statement. So it's not only a religious statement, it's also a political statement. I mean, think about what's going on in the United States in 1946.
Also think about that 46 is right after World War II and the Holocaust, and how I'm sure in their heads was how Jews were treated in Europe.
Mm-hmm, certainly.
It's an interesting time to be making a Siddur.
Right.
It certainly is. But you can see also that these brachot really express a distinctly American attitude.
Yes.
Which,
Rabbi, excuse me. Well, how long does this last? Another hour?
No, we end at 1. It's where it ends now.
I got an appointment. I'm sorry.
I have a meeting at 1 too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right.
Thanks,
So
Rabbi.
thank you all for joining. If there's a takeaway that I want to emphasize, it's that there has been tremendous fluidity in these prayers specifically in our tradition. The original structure of this was making a political and social statement, and in some ways it was reacting against the Greco-Roman society, which the rabbis wanted to distinguish themselves from. We saw that it changed, And this most recent iteration of it from 1946 is reflection of American attitudes. But it is very much in keeping with the whole idea of that these are prayers that are going to respond to the situations in which we live, and we're going to be grateful for things. And now our attitude really has changed. It's become much more universal in our approach, and so we can adjust our prayers accordingly as a reflection of that. And I think it makes it very, when we look at the history of this, I think it makes it very legitimate for us to do so. Right? Now, not to do so haphazardly, not to, I could just make up any blessing I want whenever I want. That's not necessarily a particularly Jewish way to do it. But here to really, with looking at the long history of us dealing with these things, I think these brachot become especially significant. So putting them in the place in which they traditionally appear with this change also says something. Right? It says something about continuing the tradition of reciting brachot, of having a liturgy that fits in a certain way, but also recognizing that our theologies change.
Okay, thank you.
Everyone, enjoy the rest of your week, and look forward to learning together again next week.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome.